Hey guys, welcome back to more Reddit pro-revenge stories. In this Ripestories video, what would you do if a delusional neighbor moved in and decided your backyard suddenly belonged to her? My grandpa faced exactly that when his new neighbor started trespassing and breaking into his backyard. She thought because he was a quiet old man she could bully him out of his property, but she was dead wrong. The first one is titled, "My neighbors are obnoxious, so I obnoxious them back." So there's a duplex across the street from my house with a family of like 6 to 8 people. They are living between both units, coming and going. Between the two units is paved asphalt, probably half basketball court size. They also have 2 single car garages, and even so, these people park like a-holes and block other neighbors from street parking. The curb in front of my house is enough space for 2 cars. So I've asked if they park in front of my house, please hug one side or the other so a second vehicle can also park, meaning don't park right in the middle. They apologized and said they wouldn't park in the middle anymore, but then they kept doing it anyways. So instead I parked my second car right in the middle and keep my primary car in my driveway. If you cannot have courtesy, don't expect any from me then. My second car has been parked there now for months. Well, this morning, garbage pickup, I noticed in addition to my bins in front of my house and my next door neighbor's bins, these a-holes across the street drag their bins across to my side of the street. So now there's 6 garbage bins in front of my house. I was concerned that garbage service would possibly skip some or all of them, but fortunately all the bins got emptied. But I returned home this evening to see not only their bins still in front of my house, but 3 cars on their property. So when they were home, they were too lazy to pick up their bins. I rolled them back across the street and I blocked the very front of their 5-car long tandem parking driveway. So that means they will now have to make an extra trip to the end of the driveway when they want to leave for work in the morning. And the next one is titled, "Neighbor Karen repeatedly broke into Grandpa's backyard, so he electrified the fence." Posted on r/pro-revenge. And by the way guys, let me know in the comments, do you still enjoy the pro-revenge stories? I feel like nowadays people enjoy malicious compliance more, but I still like these old school revenge stories if you ask me. By the way, it would be very much appreciated if you could like the video and post some star emojis in the comments if you want to support me. Thanks a lot. So this is actually my grandpa's story, but he doesn't use Reddit and barely knows how to use his phone for anything beyond calling and checking the weather app, so I'm telling it on his behalf. He gave me his blessing to share it because, in his words, if it makes people laugh, good. Quick background though, my grandpa is in his late 70s and lives in a small town about 2 hours outside of Almaty, Kazakhstan. He has been living on the same plot of land for over 50 years. The house is not fancy, it's a traditional Kazakh home with a little yard, a vegetable garden that he treats like his 3rd child, and a little workshop in the back where he fixes things. Grandpa is a retired mechanic who spent most of his career working on agricultural equipment for the local collective farms back in the Soviet days and then ran his own small repair shop after independence. The man can fix literally anything. Broken tractor engine? Give him an afternoon. Busted water pump? He will have it humming by dinner. He's the kind of guy who never raises his voice, he never gets into arguments with people, and he solves every problem with patience and his hands. His property is on a quiet street where most of the neighbors have known each other for decades. Everyone gets along fine. People share food during holidays, help each other with fences and roofs, mind their own business the rest of the time. Normal stuff, you know. Grandpa's plot is one of the bigger ones on the street because it's been in his family since before the neighborhood grew around it. He's got all the paperwork for it too, proper land documents that were updated after independence when Kazakhstan transitioned from Soviet land registry to private ownership. This matters later. Now enter the neighbor. She moved in about 4 years ago into the house directly behind Grandpa's property. Her plot backs up against his, separated by a metal fence that Grandpa installed himself probably 20 years ago. When she first moved in, things were fine. She introduced herself, seemed polite enough, and brought over some bread, which is a normal neighborly thing to do here. Grandpa welcomed her, told her if she ever needed help with anything around her house to just knock. That was the last normal interaction they had. Within a few months, she started making some comments about Grandpa's yard. First it was small stuff. She would lean over the fence and say things like, "Your garden is attracting too many bugs to my side," or "Those sunflowers are blocking my view." Grandpa would just nod and say something diplomatic. He's not really the confrontational type. He figured she was just adjusting to the neighborhood and being a little fuzzy. Then the complaints escalated. She started telling Grandpa that his workshop was too noisy. Mind you, this is a man who maybe runs a drill or a grinder for an hour or two during the day, always doing reasonable hours, never at night, and she told him the smell of metal and oil was contaminating her air. She complained that his chickens were too loud in the morning, and she complained that his compost pile was attracting rats, even though Grandpa's compost has been running perfectly fine for years and nobody else ever had a problem with it. She once complained that the shadow from his apple tree fell across her fence at certain times of the day and was reducing her sunlight. An apple tree that's been growing there for about 30 years. She also started making thinly veiled threats. Nothing direct to act on, but things like, "I know people at the Aconwright," and "my cousin is a lawyer in Almaty." She would drop these into conversation casually, like she was reminding Grandpa that she had connections and he'd better cooperate. Grandpa saw right through it. He'd heard tougher talk from Soviet factory foremen in the 1970s. Each time Grandpa tried to be reasonable, he moved the compost bin further from her fence, he put rubber padding under his workshop equipment to reduce vibration, and he even adjusted the chicken coop so it was further from her side of the property. Every time he bent over backwards, she found something new to complain about. It was never enough, and then she started doing something that crossed the line. She began entering Grandpa's property. The first time it happened, Grandpa was out running errands and came home to find her in his backyard near his garden, just walking around. When he asked what she was doing, she said she was checking to make sure your plants are not growing over onto my side. She said it like it was the most normal thing in the world, like she had every right to be standing in his yard uninvited. Grandpa told her politely but firmly that she shouldn't be on his property without permission. She huffed and left, and he thought that would be the end of it. It wasn't. Over the next several months, Grandpa caught her on his property at least a dozen times. Sometimes she'd be near the fence line, other times she'd be all the way over by his workshop peering through the windows. At one point, Grandpa installed a simple lock, but that didn't seem to stop her since she, or someone else, he couldn't prove it yet, seemed to get past that as well, which turned trespassing into full-on breaking into private property. Once he found her actually measuring something along the back fence with a tape measure, and when he confronted her about it, she dropped the bombshell. She said, "This section of land is actually mine. Your fence is on my property." Grandpa was stunned. He asked her what she was talking about, and she claimed that when she bought her house, the real estate agent told her that her plot extended further than where the current fence stood and that Grandpa's fence was encroaching on her land by several meters. She said she had been patient about it, but was now going to take back what is hers. Grandpa knew this was absolute nonsense. His property boundaries have not changed in half a century, and he has all the documents. He told her calmly that she was wrong and that if she had a dispute, she could go through the proper channels at the local land office. She just waved her hand and said, "I don't need paperwork. Everyone around here knows the truth." Well, nobody around there knew any such truth because it didn't exist. After the conversation, though, the trespassing got even worse. She started coming over more frequently, always with some new excuse. She brought a clipboard once, pretending to take notes like she was conducting some kind of official inspection. She brought a friend with her another time, pointing at different parts of Grandpa's yard and talking loudly about her property, while the friend nodded along. She even started moving some of Grandpa's garden tools that were near the fence, just picking them up and tossing them towards the center of his yard, saying they were on her land. One time, and this is the one that really got to me when Grandpa told me about it, she actually came into his yard while he was napping in the afternoon and started pulling up some of his tomato stakes near the back fence, just ripping them out of the ground like she had a right to reorganize his garden. Grandpa woke up to the sound, came outside and found her holding 3 of his wooden stakes with a pile of his tomato plants slumped over in the dirt. When he asked her what on earth she was doing, she said, "These structures are on my side of the property, I'm removing them." There were 4 meters inside his fence line. The neighbors were starting to notice too. The old couple who live across from Grandpa told him they had seen her hopping the fence on a weekday when Grandpa was out visiting my uncle, and she apparently didn't even try to be subtle about it, just walked around his yard looking at things. Another neighbor told Grandpa that she had approached them and tried to get them to agree that Grandpa's fence was in the wrong place. The neighbor told her that fence has been there since before she was even born, and she should mind her own business. She didn't take that well. What really bothered Grandpa, though, was not the trespassing itself, although that was bad enough, it was the entitlement behind it. This woman genuinely seemed to believe that she was right. She was not sneaking around guiltily. She pretty much walked onto his property like she owned it, because in her mind she did. No amount of talking was gonna fix that kind of delusion. I wanna pause here though and explain something about my grandpa's personality, because it's important for understanding what happened next. This man does not get angry. I've seen him deal with Soviet bureaucracy, with the chaos of the early independence years, with broken equipment that won't make anyone scream, and he handles all of it with this quiet, methodical calm. He doesn't yell, he doesn't threaten, he just thinks, plans and acts. When I was a kid, he used to tell me, "Never argue with a fool in public. Handle your business quietly and let the results speak." So then, while this woman was running around his property with tape measures and clipboards and attitude, Grandpa was doing what Grandpa does best, which is preparing. First, he went to the local land office and got a fresh, certified copy of his property survey, paid for an updated boundary confirmation, which in Kazakhstan involves an engineer coming out and verifying the markers, and yeah, everything was exactly where it had always been. His fence was not only on his property, it was actually about 1.5 meters inside his own boundary, meaning he was technically giving her extra space. He made copies of everything, put one set in a folder at home, gave another set to my uncle who lives in Almaty, and submitted a third set to the local aconwright, which is basically the municipal government office. He wanted all this on record. Next, I helped him install 2 cameras. It was nothing fancy, just basic security cameras he ordered online through a shop in Almaty, one pointing at the back fence and one covering the side of the property where she usually came in. Then came the main event though, the fence. Grandpa spent about 2 weeks researching electric fencing. He talked to some farmers outside of town who used them for livestock, looked up the regulations and found that in Kazakhstan electrical fences for property security are legal as long as they meet certain standards and have proper warning signage. The voltage has to be within specific limits and you have to clearly mark it with visible signs. He bought a proper electric fence energizer rated for perimeter security, the kind that delivers a sharp but harmless pulse. It stings like hell and makes your muscles lock up for a second, but it's not gonna put anyone in the hospital. He ran the wiring along the top rail of his existing metal fence, neat and clean, the way a mechanic does things. He used proper insulators and grounded the system correctly, and even ran a small test on himself to make sure the pulse was within the safe range. I asked him later if it hurt when he tested it, and he said, "Enough to make a point," and left it at that. The man is just built different. Then he put up 4 bright yellow signs along the fence that said, "Warning, electric fence, do not touch." Big letters, impossible to miss if you're anywhere near that fence, and he told me all about this over the phone, and I asked him if he was sure about it, and he just laughed and said, "I gave her every chance. I told her to stop, I showed her the documents. She doesn't listen to words, maybe she will listen to electricity." I visited him again about 2 weeks after he finished installing everything, and by that point the neighbor had apparently seen the signs. How do I know? Because instead of being deterred by them, she came over to Grandpa's front door and screamed at him about them. She told him that he couldn't electrify his fence, she said it was illegal, she said she was gonna call the cops, and she said that he was a crazy old man who was threatening her safety. Grandpa, sitting in his chair on the porch, just said, "The fence is on my property, the signs are clear, don't touch it." She called him a few names in Russian that I won't translate and stormed out. For about a week nothing happened. The camera showed her pacing on her side of the fence a few times, looking at the signs, but she didn't try to come over yet. I thought maybe the signs alone had worked. Then one Saturday morning I was at Grandpa's house helping him with some plumbing in the kitchen. We heard a commotion from the backyard, we went outside, and there she was, standing at the fence, this time with her adult son, who was visiting from the city. She was pointing at the signs and loudly explaining to him how Grandpa was a menace and how the fence was illegal, how the land was actually hers, and the son looked skeptical, but she was going full steam. She was pointing, gesturing, and getting progressively louder. Then she turned to Grandpa and said, "You think a silly little sign is gonna scare me? This is not even real. It is just to intimidate people." Grandpa said nothing, just stood there with his arms crossed. She looked at her son, then back at the fence, and with this dramatic display of confidence, she reached out and grabbed the top rail of the fence with her full hand. Not a quick touch, mind you, a full grip, like she was trying to prove a point. I will never forget the sound. It was not like in the movies, it was this short, sharp yelp, followed by her entire body jerking backwards. Her hand flew off the rail like it had been slapped by something invisible. She stumbled, tripped over her own feet, and fell on her backside on her own property. She sat there for a good 5 seconds with this expression on her face that was somewhere between shock, confusion, and absolute fury. Her hair was a mess, her skirt was covered in dirt, and she was holding her hand like it had personally betrayed her. Her son was just standing there with his mouth open, looking back and forth between her and the fence like he was trying to figure out what had just happened. Grandpa didn't move, he just stood there with his arms crossed, same as before. I was standing a few meters behind him and I had to bite the inside of my cheek so hard to keep from laughing that I drew blood. She got up, started screaming that Grandpa had assaulted her and that she was gonna have him arrested, that he was gonna pay for this, and her son was trying to calm her down, but she was beyond reasoning at that point. She pulled out her phone and called the police. When the police showed up later, she was ready with her full performance. Tears, dramatic gestures, the whole production. She told them that Grandpa had set up an illegal device to hurt her. She said he was dangerous, and she said he had stolen her land. She demanded that they arrest him immediately. She was pointing at her arm, showing them a red mark where she had grabbed the fence, acting like she had been hit by lightning. From what Grandpa told me later, and from what I gathered talking to one of the officers who stayed behind for a few minutes, they essentially told her 3 things. 1. The fence was legal, properly installed and clearly marked, and number 2. Grandpa's property documents were in order and there was no boundary dispute. 3. She was the one who had been trespassing, and if Grandpa wanted to press charges instead, he had more than enough evidence to do so. She didn't get arrested that day, but the officers gave her an official warning and told her that any further trespassing complaints from Grandpa would result in formal charges. They recommended that she stop entering his property immediately. Word spread fast. In a small Kazakh town, everyone knows everybody, and news like this moves at the speed of light. Within days, the whole neighborhood knew what happened, not Grandpa's version or her version, but the truth, because multiple neighbors on both sides of the fence had witnessed pieces of this saga over the months. The old couple across the street told everyone they had seen her climbing over the fence more than once. The family 2 houses down said she had tried to recruit them into her boundary dispute story, and they'd refused because they knew Grandpa's property lines were correct. Her credibility in the neighborhood was completely destroyed. The woman who had been telling everyone that Grandpa was a crazy old man stealing her land was now the woman who grabbed an electric fence on camera after ignoring 4 warning signs and then called the cops on herself. About 3 months after the incident, Grandpa told me that she had put her house up for sale. He did not know if it was because of him specifically or if there were other reasons, but he said the street felt quieter already. And yeah guys, never mess with Grandpa. The next one is a fantastic petty revenge story which is titled "Neighbor Poisoned My Cats," and it got personal. So this was several years ago, but it's time I come clean and share this story. It was the 80s. I had a neighbor who hated my cats. She would frequently complain that they were relieving themselves behind her bushes and would even collect it and leave it at our doorstep. And when that didn't get my response, my mother told me she brought a coffee can, not even filled, with cat poo. They were neighborhood outside cats and it's typical cat behavior. This gal was a hater of all animals. We would frequently see her running off birds and squirrel just for being in her yard. Over a period of a few months, 3 of my cats had sudden organ failure and the vet suspected poisoning. It was a mystery to us until we heard from another neighbor that she was bragging about poisoning cats with antifreeze. When I got confirmation that it was indeed she who poisoned my cats, I took matters into my own hands. I went to the local feed store and bought a 10-pound bag of birdseed as well as a 5-pound bag of walnuts. That night, shortly after midnight, when the lights had been off in her house, I spread the contents all over her lawn and the bushes, and the next day was pandemonium. And I'm pretty sure she was a nervous wreck. I never made the same mistake of admitting to the neighbors what I had done, but honestly, I don't think anyone else cared. Not long after I had joined the US Navy, and whenever I came home on leave, I would check to make sure she still lived there, and I would do it again. Edit: I see a lot of people applying their current point of view to the way we did things in the 80s, and I know times change, and I've evolved with that change, but I absolutely refuse to apologize for the way we did things in the 80s. And the next one is another crazy neighbor story from r/malicious compliance, which is titled "You Need to Paint Your House." So my parents had a few rental properties. One of them was a 3-story Victorian divided into apartments. 2 of the neighbors didn't like that. It was a rental. One was often referred to as Mayor because he spent most of his time going around the neighborhood telling people how to do everything, from mowing their lawn to pruning shrubs, whatever he saw that he didn't like. I had a few friends on the local cemetery maintenance crew, and they had stories about him because they gave him the title of Mayor. He would come up there regularly to tell them what they were doing wrong and what they should do instead. The other neighbor was a childhood friend of his and never had any complaints of his own, but always backed up anything his friends said in any complaints. The neighbor didn't like that it was a rental, so he complained constantly. In addition to phone calls and personal confrontations, nothing terrible, just going to the residents and us when we were there to make his feelings known, he went to borough council meetings to complain and submitted complaints to enforcement for anything they could find. We once got fined because the address numbers painted on the trash cans were 1 inch, 2.5 centimeters too short. Seriously, it cost my dad like $15. He started to complain about the house needing paint, at first with no luck. It wasn't that bad, code officer said it was okay, but eventually he prevailed and we got the order to paint the place. Back then we didn't have a lot of money, so my folks went to the local paint place and purchased all of the stuff they wanted to get rid of, returns, stuff not mixed right, whatever they could get, and even had a few painters donate their leftovers. I spent hours in the sun hand mixing the paint that was poured into a huge trash can, and once it was mixed, it was poured back into the cans ready to paint the house. It turned out to be a bright pink. We started to paint the place, and the color, well, let's just say, it was not well received, not at all. The neighbor and his friend went to borough council meetings to get it stopped. They complained to the code compliance people, but the answer? There's nothing in the code that states what color a house has to be painted. You got what you asked for. He lived next to that place for many years after he got what he asked for. And the next one is a malicious compliance story, which is titled Second Class Consulting Engineer. So years ago, I worked as a consulting engineer at this company with a very tightwad CEO with multiple sticks up his butt. Everyone else was super nice though. I engineered a machine that shipped to the Far East and was asked to go on site to start up the system. This was in the Northeast in February. Anyway, I parked on an off-site parking lot to save my client the expense of parking at the airport and flew out on a cold, clear day and landed at my destination many hours later. I spent 2+ weeks working long hours to start up this machine, so many hours that I felt bad for my client and decided I would not charge overtime. Well, fast forward to my departure, I asked for limo service home because the car was frozen solid and I'd flown some 20+ hours and was severely sleep deprived. The answer I got was a nope. Only full-time employees get limo service. Consulting engineers have to drive themselves, decreed the CEO. So then I decided to charge full overtime to the letter for every hour over 8, especially the all-nighter I pulled while there. It was the most expensive $80 limo ride he never paid for. And yeah guys, thanks for watching. I will see you again tomorrow.